The city outside was a constant, rushing river of yellow taxis and hurried footsteps. People moved with a purpose, their faces buried in scarves and collars against the chill of the afternoon. But inside the little bakery on the corner, the world seemed to slow down. It was a place that ran on the smell of sugar and yeast, on the low murmur of quiet conversations, and on the gentle clinking of ceramic spoons against porcelain cups. The air was warm and thick with the scent of freshly baked bread, sweet cinnamon, and dark, rich coffee. A small bell above the door chimed softly every time someone entered or left, a pleasant little sound that marked the passing of people in and out of this small, cozy haven. Light from the large front window spilled across the worn wooden floor, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden air like tiny, invisible fairies. In the back, the bakers could be heard moving around, their voices a low rumble behind the clatter of pans and the rhythmic thud of dough being kneaded. The display case was a rainbow of Temptation's flaky croissants, glistening fruit tarts, and dense, chocolatey brownies. It was the kind of place that felt like a hug, a temporary escape from the sharp edges of the world outside. A young woman pushed open the door, the bell announcing her arrival with a cheerful jingle. She had a gentle, open face and wore a brightly colored scarf that seemed to capture a piece of the afternoon sun and wrap it around her neck. Her eyes, wide and curious, scanned the bakery with a look of pure, unfiltered delight. This wasn't just a place to get food. For her, it was a destination filled with wonder. She moved slowly, taking in every detail, the way the frosting swirled on top of the cupcakes, the little handwritten signs describing the soup of the day, the steam rising from a fresh pot of coffee. Her name was Clara, and this small ritual was the highlight of her week. After 5 long days of routine, of quiet moments and sometimes lonely ones, this was her treat. Her own personal celebration. She walked up to the counter, her steps light and careful. She didn't need to look at the menu. She already knew what she wanted. She pointed a single, decisive finger at a chocolate croissant, the one with the perfectly shiny, dark brown exterior that promised a light. Airy interior, the woman behind the counter. An older lady with a kind face and a flour-dusted apron smiled warmly at her. "The usual, my dear?" she asked. Clara nodded enthusiastically, her smile widening. It was a smile that started in her eyes and spread across her entire face, a genuine and powerful expression of happiness that could light up a room. She paid with a handful of crumpled bills she had carefully counted out earlier that morning, her movements precise and proud, with the warm paper bag in her hand. She found her favorite spot, a small table for 2 right by the window. It gave her a perfect view of the street, where she could watch the world go by without having to be a part of its rush. She placed the bag on the table and took off her coat, folding it neatly and placing it on the empty chair beside her. Then she began the little ritual. She carefully unfolded the top of the paper bag, the crinkling sound of familiar and comforting music to her ears. She peeked inside as if to make sure her treasure was still there, and then gently lifted the croissant out. It was still warm. She could feel the heat through the thin paper. She placed it on a napkin in the center of the table and just looked at it for a moment, admiring its perfect shape. It was more than just a pastry. It was a reward, a symbol of her independence, a small, perfect thing in a big, complicated world. She broke off a small piece and the flaky crust shattered softly. She brought the piece to her lips, and her eyes closed as the rich, buttery chocolate melted on her tongue. A soft, contented sigh escaped her. It was, in her mind, the most wonderful taste in the entire world. Across the room, sitting in a quieter corner with his back mostly to the wall, was a man. He was tall and lean, dressed in a simple dark jacket and a worn baseball cap pulled low. He looked like any other person seeking a moment of refuge, a place to gather his thoughts. He had a book lying on the table next to his coffee, but he wasn't reading it. Instead, he was watching the people in the bakery, his gaze quiet and observant. He had been there for a while, his coffee now half empty and cold. He was a man who was used to being seen, to having eyes on him wherever he went. But here, in the shadow of his cap and the anonymity of the crowd, he was just another face. He found a strange comfort in that he had noticed the young woman when she came in. It was hard not to. She had an energy about her, a pure and simple joy that was rare to see in the city. He watched her as she ordered, as she carefully chose her table, as she performed the small, sacred ritual of unwrapping her pastry. He saw the way her face lit up, the complete and total absorption in the simple pleasure of the moment. There was no pretense, no holding back. It was just honest, unadulterated happiness. He found himself smiling, a private, small smile that no one else could see. In a world that often felt cynical and rushed, her simple delight was a powerful thing to witness. It was a reminder that happiness could be found in the smallest of things, in a warm pastry on a cold afternoon, in a quiet corner of a bustling city. He took a slow sip of his cold coffee, his eyes still on her, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. The two of them, strangers in a crowded room, were sharing a moment, though neither of them knew it. They were each in their own world, but for a brief time, their worlds were aligned in the quiet, warm air of the little bakery, a small pocket of calm before the storm. The quiet hum of the bakery was a fragile thing, a delicate balance of sounds and smells that could be easily broken. And broken it was. The little bell above the door chimed again, but this time it wasn't a cheerful jingle. It was a sharp, intrusive clang that cut through the warm air like a knife. 3 people stumbled in, bringing the cold, harsh energy of the street with them. They were loud from the moment they crossed the threshold, their voices booming and echoing in the small space that was meant for whispers and soft conversations. They were a stark contrast to the gentle warmth of the bakery, like a splash of cold mud on a clean white canvas. There were 2 of them, a man and a woman, followed by another man who seemed to be trailing behind them. The first man had a booming laugh that seemed too big for the room, a sound that was more about being heard than about finding something funny. He wore a shiny jacket that rustled with every movement, and he moved with an exaggerated confidence, as if he owned the place. The woman with him had a sharp, high-pitched voice that sliced through the air. Her eyes darted around the room, not with curiosity, but with a kind of bored judgment, as if she was looking for something to make fun of. The third man was quieter, but he had a smirk permanently fixed on his face, a silent partner in the disruption they were causing. They didn't seem to be there for the coffee or the pastries. They were there to make noise, to fill the quiet space with their own presence. They shoved their way to the counter, their voices loud and demanding. "What's good here that's actually, good?" the woman asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. The kind lady behind the counter, who had been smiling just moments before, now had a tight, professional smile on her face. She patiently listed the specials, but her words were lost under the barrage of their loud jokes and complaints. The whole atmosphere of the room had changed. The other patrons, who had been enjoying their peaceful afternoon, now seemed to shrink in their seats. People looked down at their phones or into their coffee cups, trying to make themselves invisible. The warm, safe feeling of the bakery had evaporated, replaced by a tense, uncomfortable silence that was punctuated by the bullies' loud laughter, and then their eyes landed on the young woman by the window dot. At first, it was just a glance. A nudge from the woman to the man in the shiny jacket, a snicker. They had found their entertainment for the afternoon. The young woman, who had been so lost in her world of chocolate and flaky pastry, was now the center of their unwanted attention. She could feel their eyes on her, a heavy, prickly sensation that made the back of her neck feel hot. She tried to ignore them, focusing on her croissant, taking another small bite. But the taste had changed. The buttery chocolate no longer melted on her tongue. It felt like a dry, tasteless lump. The magic was gone. The whispers started, then low and hissing like snakes. They were too far away for her to hear the exact words, but she could hear the tone. It was the tone people used when they were making fun of someone, a cruel, sing-song whisper that was somehow worse than a shout. The man with the loud laugh let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh, and then quickly covered his mouth, pretending it was a cough. But it wasn't a cough. It was a sound meant to wound. The young woman's shoulders began to slump. She wrapped her arms around herself, a small, self-protective gesture. The window, which had been a portal to a fascinating world, now felt like a barrier, trapping her in this small, horrible moment. She wished she could just disappear through the glass and melt into the crowd on the sidewalk, across the room. The man in the corner had put his book down. His quiet moment of reflection was over. He watched the scene unfold, his face a mask of stillness. The gentle smile he had worn while watching the young woman enjoy her treat was long gone. His jaw was tight, and his eyes, which had been soft and observant, were now hard and focused. He saw everything. He saw the way the bully's eyes gleamed with malice. He saw the way the other customers looked away, too scared or too uncomfortable to intervene. And most of all, he saw the young woman. He saw the light in her eyes dim, as if someone had turned down a dimmer switch inside her. He saw her shrink in her seat, her joy crushed under the weight of their casual cruelty. He felt a cold anger rise up in his chest, a slow, steady burn. He didn't move. He just watched, his hands resting on the table, still as stone. He was a coiled spring, waiting. The cruelty escalated. It wasn't enough to just whisper and laugh. They wanted a reaction. The woman with the sharp voice let out an exaggerated, high-pitched giggle and then began to mimic the way the young woman held her croissant, her hands flapping in a crude, mocking imitation. The man with the loud laugh joined in, making a strange, nonsensical sound under his breath, a distorted echo of the happy sigh the young woman had made earlier. It was a direct, undeniable attack. They weren't just being loud anymore. They were targeting her, singling her out for their amusement. The young woman heard it this time. She couldn't not. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and hurt. She looked from the woman to the man and then back again. Her face was a question mark. Why? What had she done? She didn't understand. She had just been sitting there, eating her croissant, minding her own business. She had been happy. And now she wasn't. The world had turned upside down in just a few minutes. Her carefully constructed sanctuary, her weekly treat, had been violated. She felt a hot sting behind her eyes, a warning of tears to come. She quickly looked down at her plate, staring at the half-eaten croissant as if it held the answers to a question she didn't want to ask. Her hands were trembling slightly, so she clasped them together in her lap, hiding them from view. The man in the corner saw the tremble. He saw the fight go out of her posture, the way she curled into herself, trying to become as small as possible. His anger deepened, but it was a cold, controlled anger. He was not a man who acted on impulse. He was a man who watched, who processed, who waited for the right moment. He could feel the tension in the room, a palpable thing that hung in the air like a thick fog. Everyone felt it. Everyone saw what was happening. And everyone was doing nothing. The bullies, fed by the silence of the crowd, grew bolder. Their laughter grew louder, their gestures more exaggerated. They were in their element, performers on a stage they had created, with a captive audience that was too afraid to walk out. The man in the corner knew that someone had to do something. Someone had to break the spell. He took a slow, deep breath, his mind racing. He wasn't just a spectator anymore. He was a part of this, and he knew, with a certainty that settled in his bones, that he was about to become a much bigger part. The quiet, still man in the corner was getting ready to move. The air in the bakery was thick and heavy, like a wet blanket. The laughter from the corner table wasn't just loud. It was aggressive. It filled up every empty space, pushing out the warm smells of sugar and coffee and replacing them with something sour and mean. The young woman by the window felt it pressing in on her from all sides. She was a small island, and the tide of their cruelty was rising, threatening to pull her under. She kept her head down, her eyes fixed on the napkin on her table, tracing its crinkled edges with her fingertip. If she just stayed very still, maybe they would get bored and go away. Maybe the world would go back to the way it was just a few minutes ago, but the man in the corner knew that wouldn't happen. He had seen this kind of thing before. It was a fire that fed on silence. The more people pretended not to see, the bigger and bolder the flames grew. He could feel the eyes of the other patrons darting around, looking everywhere but at the scene unfolding. They were prisoners of their own fear, hoping someone else would be the hero. He watched the bullies feed off this collective inaction. Their postures became more arrogant, their smiles wider. They owned the room now. And in that moment the man made a decision. It wasn't a sudden burst of anger or a heroic impulse. It was a quiet, firm choice that settled deep inside him. He had been a passive observer long enough. He looked at the young woman's hunched shoulders, at the way she had made herself so small, and he knew he couldn't just sit there and watch her light be snuffed out. He took one last, slow sip of his cold coffee, the bitter taste a stark contrast to the warmth he intended to create. Then, with a smooth, deliberate motion, he pushed his chair back. The sound of the chair legs scraping against the wooden floor was small, but in the tense silence of the bakery it sounded like a gunshot. A few heads turned in his direction, including the bullies. They gave him a quick, dismissive glance, then turned their attention back to their target. He was just another customer leaving, another person escaping the uncomfortable scene. He stood up, adjusting his simple jacket. He was tall, and for a moment, his frame cast a long shadow across the room. He didn't look at anyone. He just started to walk, his steps calm and measured. Heading not toward the bullies, but toward the front door, he moved with an easy grace, weaving between the tables. As he passed the main counter, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to the kind lady who was now wiping the same spot on the counter over and over again. Her own way of dealing with the tension. He was almost there. Just a few more feet to the door, to the bell, to the escape that everyone else in the room secretly wished for. The bullies were watching him now. Their cruel entertainment paused for a moment as they assessed this new movement. The young woman by the window also looked up, her eyes wide with a flicker of hope. Was he going to get help? Was he going to say something to the staff? And then it happened. Just as he reached the small, clear space near the exit, his foot seemed to catch on nothing. He stumbled, a clumsy, awkward movement that was completely out of character with his calm walk. His hand flew out, but it was too late. The ceramic cup slipped from his grasp. It didn't fall in slow motion. It fell with a sudden, shocking finality. It hit the hard wooden floor and exploded into a dozen pieces with a deafening crack that echoed through the entire bakery. The remaining half-cup of cold, black coffee splashed outwards, a dark, spreading stain on the light-colored floor. The sound was so sharp, so unexpected, that it made everyone jump. The bullies' laughter died in their throats, replaced by a startled silence. The young woman flinched, her hands flying to her chest. Every single person in the bakery was now looking at one thing, the man standing in the middle of a mess of his own making. A look of genuine surprise and embarrassment on his face. "Oh my goodness," he said. His voice loud enough for everyone to hear, but filled with sincere apology. He looked down at the shattered pieces and the spreading puddle of coffee. "I am so clumsy. I am incredibly sorry." The staff immediately sprang into action. One of the bakers came out from the back with a mop and bucket, and the kind lady from the counter rushed over with a "Caution, wet floor" sign and a roll of paper towels. "It's quite all right, sir. Don't you worry," she said with a reassuring smile. "These things happen." The man crouched down, carefully picking up the larger, sharper pieces of the broken cup and placing them on a nearby table. "I feel just terrible about this," he said, his tone one of complete sincerity. "Such a mess." The disruption was total. The entire focus of the room had shifted. The drama of the bullies and their victim was forgotten, replaced by this new, mundane, and absorbing drama of a spilled drink. The bullies were now just part of the audience, their power completely gone. They stood there awkwardly, their cruel performance interrupted. One of them cleared his throat, but no one was paying them any attention. The man had, with one simple, accidental act, reset the entire social dynamic of the room. He had stolen their show. He handed the last piece of the broken cup to the staff member and stood up, brushing off his hands. "Thank you," he said to them, his voice warm with gratitude. "I really appreciate your help." He had apologized, he had helped clean up, he had been a perfect gentleman. The logical next step, the one everyone expected, was for him to turn. push open the door and leave his duty done, but he did and single quote. Instead, he turned away from the door and his eyes scanned the room. They passed over the bullies without a single pause, without even a flicker of recognition. It was as if they were invisible to him, as if they were nothing more than empty chairs. His gaze continued, moving past the other relieved patrons, until it landed on the young woman sitting by the window. She was watching him, her expression a mixture of confusion and curiosity. The commotion had broken the spell of her fear. She was no longer trapped in her own little bubble of misery. She was just another person watching a man spill his coffee. But now that man was walking toward her. A new kind of tension gripped her. What did he want? Was he going to make fun of her too? Her body tensed, and she started to shrink back into her chair, her old defenses returning. He walked right up to her table. He didn't stand over her in a threatening way. He just stood there for a moment, a gentle, warm smile on his face. Then he did something that completely surprised her. He pulled out the empty chair opposite her, the one where she had placed her coat, and asked in a soft voice, "Do you mind if I sit here for just a moment?" She could only manage a small, hesitant nod. He sat down, placing his hands on the table in an open, relaxed way. He didn't look at her half-eaten croissant or at her tear-streaked face. He just looked at her, directly in the eyes, and his smile was kind and genuine. It was a smile that reached his own eyes, crinkling the corners in a friendly way. "I'm sorry to bother you," he began, his voice calm and quiet, a stark contrast to the noise that had filled the room just moments before. "I was on my way out, but I just have to say that looks like the best croissant in the entire city." He gestured with his chin toward her plate. "I was watching you enjoy it before my little accident. Is it as good as it looks?" For a long moment, the young woman just stared at him. Her mind was trying to catch up. 1 minute she was the target of cruel laughter, an island of shame in a sea of silent onlookers. The next, this stranger, the same man who had just made a loud, clumsy mess, was sitting at her table, asking her about her croissant with a smile that seemed to warm the very air around them. Her first instinct was to pull back, to mistrust this sudden change. It felt like a trick, a new kind of game she didn't understand. Her eyes darted from his kind face to the now empty table where the bullies had been sitting. They were still there watching, their expressions a mixture of confusion and annoyance, but the man's eyes were patient. He didn't rush her. He just waited, his smile never wavering. It wasn't a fake smile or a pitying smile. It was the kind of smile you give a friend when you see them across a room. It was genuine, and in that genuine, patient smile, she saw something that made her shoulders relax just a little. She saw no hint of mockery. There was only simple, honest curiosity. Slowly, hesitantly, she gave a small nod. Then she found her voice, though it was just a soft whisper at first. It's very good?" The man's smile widened, as if she had just told him a wonderful secret. "I knew it," he said, leaning forward a little, his voice still soft and warm. "I have a theory about this place. I think they put a little bit of magic in their chocolate. It's the only explanation." He wasn't looking at her with any special kind of look. He was just talking, sharing a small, silly thought. It was the most normal thing in the world. A tiny, almost invisible smile touched the young woman's lips. It was just a faint curve, but it was there. She looked down at her plate, at the half-eaten croissant that had been the source of her joy and then her pain. She picked it up again, and this time, when she took a small bite, it tasted different. The buttery flavor was back. The chocolate was sweet again. The magic hadn't gone away after all. "What's your name?" The man asked gently. She told him her name, her voice a little stronger this time. "It's a very beautiful name," he said. "It's nice to meet you. I'm just a guy who really appreciates a good pastry." He didn't offer his own name. It didn't seem to matter. In this small bubble of conversation, they were just two people brought together by a chocolate croissant and a spilled cup of coffee. The atmosphere in the bakery had completely transformed. The tension that had been hanging in the air like a storm cloud had dissipated. The staff had finished cleaning up the mess and had retreated back behind their counter, but they were watching the scene at the window table with quiet, knowing smiles. The other patrons, who had been hiding in their phones and coffee cups, were now relaxed. Some were even smiling to themselves. The man, with his simple act of kindness, had not only protected the young woman, he had healed the entire room. But what about the bullies? They were now the ones who felt out of place. Their fun was ruined. The center of attention had shifted from their cruel performance to this quiet, intimate conversation. They were no longer the powerful ones. They were just a background detail, an ugly painting that everyone was now ignoring. One of them cleared his throat loudly, trying to get some attention back, but no one looked. The man and the young woman were in their own world, a world that had no room for cruelty. The man started talking about other things. He asked her if she came to this bakery often. He told her about a different bakery he used to go to when he was younger, a place that made amazing apple turnovers. He wasn't interviewing her or prying into her life. He was just making conversation, the way you would with any stranger you found yourself sitting next to. He was treating her with a complete and total normalcy that was more powerful than any grand gesture could ever be. He was seeing her, not her condition, not her situation, but her. A person who liked chocolate croissants. The young woman found herself opening up. She told him that, yes, this was her favorite place and that she came every week. She told him that the chocolate croissant was her special treat. As she spoke, her voice grew stronger, more confident. The light that had been dimmed in her eyes was starting to shine again, brighter this time, fueled by the simple respect she was being shown. She sat up straighter in her chair. She even laughed a little at one of his silly stories about a pigeon that had once stolen a piece of his muffin in a park. The bullies couldn't take it anymore. They were being ignored and their power was gone. They huddled together, whispering amongst themselves. They shot angry glares at the man's back, but he didn't seem to notice. He was too busy listening to the young woman talk about her favorite part of the croissant, the way the chocolate was still a little bit warm in the middle. Finally, with a last muttered comment, the three of them got up and pushed their way out the door. The bell chimed, but this time the sound wasn't intrusive. It was a relief. It was the sound of the last bit of negativity leaving the room. And the most amazing part was the young woman and the man didn't even notice them go. They were too caught up in their conversation. They talked for a few more minutes. It felt like a long time and no time at all. The man never once mentioned what had happened. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't need to. His presence was the answer. He had shown her she was okay by treating her as if she had always been okay. Then he glanced at the clock on the wall. "Oh, wow," he said, a hint of genuine regret in his voice. "I didn't realize how late it was. I have to get going." He stood up from his chair, and for a moment the young woman felt a small pang of fear. Worried that the safe bubble he had created would pop as soon as he left, he pushed the chair back under the table. "It was a real pleasure meeting you," he said, looking down at her with that same warm, kind smile. "Thank you for sharing your croissant review with me. I'll definitely have to try one next time." He gave her a small, respectful nod. "You have a wonderful day." And then he was gone. He walked calmly to the door, pushed it open, and stepped out into the busy street, disappearing into the crowd of anonymous faces. The bell chimed one last time, a soft, final note. The young woman sat there for a moment, alone again. But she wasn't the same. The world outside the window didn't seem scary anymore. The other people in the bakery didn't seem like threats. She looked down at the last piece of her croissant, picked it up, and ate it. It was delicious. She finished her coffee, gathered her coat, and stood up. As she walked to the door to leave, she felt a new spring in her step. She felt taller. She felt seen. The quiet man hadn't just stopped some bullies. He had given her back something much more valuable. He had given her back her joy. The bell above the door chimed softly as the young woman stepped back out onto the sidewalk. The city was still there, a rushing river of noise and people, but it felt different. It no longer seemed like a threatening force waiting to swallow her whole. The sharp edges of the buildings looked a little softer. The blare of a distant siren sounded a little less like a personal alarm. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the cool afternoon air, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like she was breathing in possibility, not fear. She walked home with a new lightness in her step, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there when she had set out on her weekly adventure. The world hadn't changed, but her place in it felt a little bit safer, a little bit kinder. When she got home, her family noticed the change immediately. It wasn't anything she said or did dramatically. It was in the way she held her shoulders straight and proud. It was in the small, easy smile that played on her lips as she hung up her coat. For months, her return from any outing had been a tense event, a debriefing of every perceived slight or uncomfortable stare. But today she just seemed peaceful. When her older sister asked how her trip to the bakery was, she didn't just say it was fine. She told her about the croissant, about how perfectly warm the chocolate was. And then, after a moment's hesitation, she told her about the man. She described the spilled coffee, the way he had sat down, and the simple, kind questions he had asked. As she spoke, the light in her eyes that her family had missed so much seemed to flicker back to life. Brighter and more resilient than ever before, her sister listened, her heart first aching at the thought of the bullies, then swelling with a powerful, protective anger. But as the story continued, that anger transformed into something else, something profound. She saw not just a story of cruelty, but a story of incredible, unexpected grace. She saw how a simple act of decency had acted as a shield, a sword, and a healing balm all at once. She realized that this wasn't just a nice anecdote to be shared within the family. This was a story that the world needed to hear. A few days later, the sister sat down at her computer and started to write. She didn't write out of a desire for fame or attention. She wrote because she was filled with a message that was burning to get out. She began by painting a picture of their lives, of the world that had shrunk to the size of their living room. She wrote about the fear, the anxiety, and the cruel words that had built walls around her sister's spirit. She explained in heartbreakingly simple terms what that trip to the bakery had really meant. It wasn't just a craving for a pastry. It was a planned expedition, a therapeutic exercise, a monumental step taken with trembling hands and a pounding heart. It was a test, and they had all been terrified of what would happen if she failed, and she described the incident. She wrote about the bullies, not to give them power, but to show the darkness that her sister had been facing. And then she wrote about the man. She described his accident and his quiet intervention with the awe and reverence it deserved. She called it a masterclass in human decency. She explained that he hadn't fought fire with fire. He had simply flooded the room with so much light that the fire couldn't breathe. She detailed the conversation, the normalcy of it, the way he had treated her sister not as a victim to be pitied, but as a person to be respected. At the post, she added a final, shocking paragraph. She wrote, "We later found out who the man in the bakery was." But that's not the point of this story. The point isn't that a famous person was kind. The point is that a person was kind. A person saw someone hurting and, without a second thought, created a small, safe space for her with nothing but a spilled cup of coffee and a few kind words. He didn't know the battles she was fighting. He just saw a human being who deserved respect. And in doing so, he didn't just ruin a bully's afternoon. He helped heal a wounded spirit. He gave my sister her world back. She posted it on a small, personal blog, mostly for friends and family. But the story was too powerful, too human, to stay small. A friend shared it on Facebook. And then a friend of that friend shared it. Within a day, it was picked up by a local online news outlet. The next day, a national website shared it, and then another. The headline was always some version of the one she had inadvertently created: Keanu Reeves stops bullies. But what he did next is truly shocking. The story went viral, but the comments weren't just about the actor. People from all over the world latched onto the core message. They shared their own stories of being bullied, of seeing someone be bullied and being too scared to step in. They shared stories of small, unexpected kindnesses that had changed their day or even their life. The post became a global conversation about empathy, about courage, and about the incredible impact one person can have when they choose to act with compassion. It was a reminder that you don't need a loud voice or a grand gesture to make a difference. Sometimes all you need is a quiet moment and a willing heart, and through it all, the man at the center of the storm remained silent. There was no press release, no public statement. His lack of a search for the spotlight only made the story resonate more deeply. It confirmed what the sister had written. It was never about him. It was about the act itself, the truly shocking part of the story. The part that made millions of people stop and think was the revelation of the stakes. It wasn't just a story about a celebrity being a good guy. It was the stark, powerful truth that this simple, 5-minute interaction in a quiet bakery had been a lifeline. It was a testament to the fact that kindness is not a soft, passive thing. It is an active, revolutionary force. It can be a shield against the world's cruelty, a key to unlock a prison of fear, and a light that can guide someone back to themselves. The young woman continued her weekly trips to the bakery. The croissant was still delicious, but now it tasted like more than just chocolate and butter. It tasted like courage, like hope, and like the quiet, undeniable proof that even in a noisy, rushing world, a single act of simple human decency can change everything.